All right. I'm here to chat with people, and I put the link in the thing. It's been a slow day, but I've been reading a lot of chapters of my book, and I've set them up so that a new one drops every day, and I'm a little disappointed because the one that came out today got one view for 27 seconds. And that doesn't seem like enough. Um, so I don't know. And then I had a weird controversial idea because I put a cartoon of Joe Camel on the thumbnail, and I thought maybe that was like the algo doesn't like that. I'm guessing it's still a controversial character. So then I like blurred it out and changed the thumbnail, but nobody else viewed it. So I don't know, just a weird thing, or maybe people just aren't that interested in the book. But I'm trying to be a person that follows through with commitments, and since that's a thing that I have to do, I'm just gonna keep plugging away at it since it's been out for like a year anyway. But I don't want to talk about the things that I've been talking about myself to myself for the past several hours and days. I want to talk about whatever other people want to talk about. So, somebody come on. Maybe I'll just not talk. So this, uh, so this was the thumbnail for the video that I put on there, and then I was worried that maybe it was Joe Camel that was getting me in trouble, so I changed it to this, but didn't really have an impact. Uh, But I thought it was a cool picture because in the chapter of the book, I talked about the influence of advertising and marketing and all that stuff, and how it's all designed to increase covetousness in our culture. And of course, Joe Camel's the pernicious advertisement that we recognize as being an ill effect. But I was thinking back to, like, the X-Men cartoon I watched as a kid, and I'm like, these women they're not really wearing clothes. They just have colored bodies that represent clothes. And that was like is it still showing it? I don't know. Anyway, that was like showing hyper feminization for like young men, along with the hyper masculinization of like He-Man and professional wrestling and stuff like that. And the way that it changed consumer habits, because boys used to play outdoors. Boys used to like toys more that were about being someone, like you'd have guns and you play cowboys and Indians or army guys. And now everything is designed to keep people sitting in front of the television. So that's what I was talking about. Hello, Yoav. How are you?
I'm fine. Still fine. How are you?
Kind of bored, honestly. I'm working from home because of the baby, but the big kids are at school and the toddlers, everybody else is taking a nap. So I guess it's a good problem to have. But David always had to be the Indian when in Cowboys and Indians. But did you get to win sometimes? That's the question.
Which channels are we on?
I just put it on mine, and I put it on the Randos one.
Mm-hmm.
I like that I can put things on Jacob's channel, but sometimes I don't want to invite all his controversy. I want to find the people that like me for me. So. Yeah, tomahawks are cooler. Kind of like medieval. I don't know. What's the Israeli equivalent? What do kids play? They didn't play Cowboys and Indians?
They used to when I was a kid, because it all depends on the media. We had a lot of cowboy films and cowboy cartoons.
Well, did everybody have a standard opinion about who are the good guys and who are the bad guys?
No, it's more like we had no relation to the history, so it was like cats and mouse. Who's the bad and who's the bad and who's the good when you have a cartoon about a cat and a mouse?
David wants me to ask you about whales. What's that about?
David had a stream about Leviathan. And I said I had a story about whales, and I didn't want to tell it on Jacob channel, because I didn't want to raise the Jacob controversy. You said it.
Yeah.
On his channel. But,
okay.
But thinking of it, I don't want to do it on your channel as well. I don't want to bring those points of difficult discussion to bring them here because I found them too difficult there. So
I don't know.
I still owe David a story. I will look for. I mean, I hope that our friendship will be long, and one of those years I will tell the story. Obviously, yes, it is obviously Trinitarian Zionist world story. This is why I'm not telling it.
Well, I have thought gone to the Orca show that they have at SeaWorld a few times. And I've thought this must be like, I'm like, this might be what that Leviathan thing was all about. Like, if you're going to have a ferocious sea monster, I mean, those things are pretty incredible. But
I beg to differ, because Orca lives in the cold waters of the north. The people who wrote the Bible did not have this specific species of a whale in mind. And as I said to David, I'm quite sure that I know what they were talking about. Because if you go for a walk in the deserts of Egypt, you will find the desert littered with skeletons of whales.
Oh, yeah.
And these are ancient whales, and the species name is Basilosaurus. And I think it's bigger than an orca, and it looks more like a snake or like a lizard.
Okay.
And if you have any curiosity whatsoever, you start thinking, I mean, this is obviously a sea creature, because having no legs and having this kind of a tail, and you can see bits of fins. Who took a bunch of extremely big, heavy whales and threw them from the sea into the in the middle of the Egyptian desert? It must be quite a fearsome god that was able to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, global flood and all that. So
could maybe this also. But specifically, you see the whales. You don't see other animals.
Well, I know some people aren't convinced of a flood that would be global all at once, but I'm pretty sure there's not many, if any. I don't know if there's any parts of the planet where they haven't found evidence that it was flooded at some time. Like even up there on the Himalayas, where they got all the seashells and stuff like that, and so I don't know. Yes. There's even like right where I live, in the woods behind my house, there I find fossils all the time. But there's a one park where you don't realize it at first, because you just look and you just see rocks. But then when you go up close, they're just piles and piles and piles of tiny seashells, all globbed together. Yeah.
Fine. Okay. So definitely there were a lot of extremely major big floods. Like all of the Mediterranean was once dry. We know this for sure. And then at one point it was flooded. The Persian Gulf, where the ancient Sumerian and the later cultures were living, that was flooded at a point. Huge local floods happened, that's for sure. We're getting to the question of which story that you believe. There are two stories here. One of is the story of the young Earth, and the other is the story of the old Earth.
Well, we got more stories now, though. That's like, I mean, there's some there's some interesting in between kind of people there. On, I guess what as science becomes less credible, pseudoscience becomes more in vogue. So
yeah, but I want to be. I want to be more restrictive.
okay,
I will put it. I have two serious contenders, and let's accept the young Earth.
you ever read this guy?
No,
Oh, he's a fascinating guy. Just to this book was apparently on Einstein's desk when he died. But
fine. But what is the age of the Earth according to this book?
I don't know if he gives a specific, but he was definitely one of the people that brought catastrophism in general back towards the mainstream. He wasn't particularly religious, or he didn't have a religious motivation, but he was looking for basically data points to figure out what happened in all the ancient mythologies of all the cultures, and kind of trying to harmonize them in a global thing.
Okay, so I have a meta comment to Hezi and David. I'm going to lead this discussion somewhere, and Mr. Sartori is giving me a fight.
No, you go.
No,
I don't have a fight.
No, sorry. But it just means that this is going to take some time.
Okay.
But I don't mind. I mean, we are here to spend some time. We are not here to get into any fast conclusions. So just telling you, telling our audience to hang on, because things might get interesting later on. So this book you were telling about, between the two options, young Earth and old Earth, was it leaning anywhere, or is it just offering a third option?
Well, I guess you could say the bigger. I mean, I think young Earth, old Earth maybe isn't the best case. The big difference is between gradualism and catastrophism. Because for a long time you weren't allowed to say that anything happened through monumentous events. Everything was perceived to be slow, gradual, incremental. So there's been a little pushback. So you can still have a
fine. I mean, but this is now resolved. There is no doubt that catastrophes happened, and quite like the one that killed the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And that it was not even the most catastrophic of them. There was even a greater one before that. But there is a story here. The old Earth story is an interesting story, because there is a lot of evidence thrown out all over the world for it. And it makes for a coherent, interesting story. The question is, what do you make of this story? Somebody had to throw all of this evidence. So somebody's put the evidence there, and it made it fit just so that the old Earth story would be believable. And if you don't believe it as the truth, then you have facing two options. Was it put there by God, or was it put there by Satan? And my point at the moment, this is not where I was leading, my point at the moment is, can it be possibly be Satan? Because you are attributing Satan too much creativity and too much beauty and too much sophistication. Believing that all this story about the dinosaurs and about the ancient catastrophe, believing that this story was invented by Satan, I think it would amount to Satan worship. Do you have any position on that?
No, I don't think. Yeah, I think that sounds fair enough. I don't think that. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of wiggle room. If you want to be like following the biblical story, there's a lot of wiggle room with what that whole first section of Genesis to interpret it many ways that don't require Satan burying dinosaur bones or something. So yeah,
but the bones are there,
right? So I'm saying that you can
find some kind of an explanation. How come they are put there? I mean, what for? Somebody wrote a story into the rock.
Mm-hmm.
What's the use of telling this story? The story is there. We read it. Why telling it?
Well, I mean, I am skeptical about a lot of the dating methods and things like that. I mean, so like I think that, and that's why I say, like, I have a little bit of I think in some ways the text is obscure. Yeah, Hizzy's giving us the points. I mean, and that's almost like I mean, I do think that ultimately those things are discernible, and I think that in the final reckoning of things, it will more or less come out as like, oh, God was speaking the truth. He was just not maybe speaking the things that we exactly want. I see some limitations in the hardcore young earthers really try to do this thing of staying faithful to the word, but they're already like they have some kind of epistemological blind spots in what they're presupposing about things that I don't think that they can can't make the case as strong as they want. I think on the one hand, you don't have a lot of human stuff mixed in with all those other things. So in that sense, if it's a story of other creatures or whatever, then they are creatures that maybe came before us or weren't so so closely related to what was going on with the people. I mean, I also think that the way I read the story of Noah, I think Noah probably boarded the ark in a time of population collapse. I don't think there was a lot of other people around. But
it doesn't need to be population collapse. There were rarely. You will very hard pressed to find any time when there are lots of people around. Usually there were quite a few. I mean, not too many.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing of people extrapolating. Well, if they lived all these long ages and all these things, and there would be some, but I don't think people were really all that keen on obeying God. So when he said, be fruitful and multiply, they didn't want to do it. We're obsessed with sex. So we can't imagine that people in prior points of history didn't feel the same way. But I think
I don't think it was lack of desire. I think it was, child mortality. There were lions around that were eating your babies. The food was scarce. There was an ice age. People were really trying hard and not succeeding much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know there are people who have very, coherent explanations for how they think everything fits together. To me, it's not as important as it used to be. I mean, to me, it's my I take more comfort in the fact that nobody's explanation is that airtight, so it doesn't really matter, like in some sense.
No, okay, but I want to just classify it in two degrees of problems with the story.
Okay.
There are small holes that can be filled with a little bit more of effort. Like, I don't know the name and the lifespan of any animals that ever lived, but I don't really need to know all the details to have a coherent story. These are the fact that I don't know how many dinosaurs lived 70 million years ago. I don't know the exact number and the exact location. That doesn't matter at all. These are tiny holes that you don't even need to fill. And then there are medium-sized holes. One of them is known as the Cambrian explosion. There is a certain date, according to the old Earth theory, of 500 million years ago. And suddenly things started to go there. After that year, you get animals that look sort of familiar. Some look like crabs, or they look like snails, or they look like fish, or animals that you can recognize as animals. A year before that, you don't get anything that you recognize as an animal. You get sort of alien things in the bottom of the ocean that might be related to animals, but don't look like animals and don't move much. And I can understand the catastrophe in the sense of things dying very quickly, like if a meteorite hits, or there is a flood, or a certain drought, and I can understand a great dying. But life springing from 0 to 100 within a year, this is a medium-sized question, and it hasn't been answered. And the problem with this kind of question is that the more you explore, the more difficult it is, because you keep finding more and more facts, and they keep sharpening the dilemma. Like when you didn't know much, you said, well, it wasn't a year, it could have been 50 million years. I mean, with what we know, cannot see it from far away, the difference between 1 year and 50 million years. But the more you dig, the sharper the boundary appears. And that is a question. So this old Earth story is basically most of the time very coherent, but it breaks at points in a worrying way. And then there are the big questions that we really stuck, and the more we dig, the more we understand that we can never answer the question. And that is the question of the beginning of life. Nothing that science have discovered so far gets us any near solving this question. And the more we dig, the more we understand that we don't know. So anyone's position about it should be, well, I don't really know and I will never know. But then theology, from that point, the theology differs. And some people, I mean, the wiser of the people say, well, if I don't know, I will never know, then I should not really care. Comments?
Well, I think it's all very interesting. So, I mean, I've kept up to, like, there's a lot of different hypotheses, and I've synthesized and thought some of my own. So I'd say this. So, and I've seen some of the, like, so there's a problem with the internet, like, research, because you'll have people that want to argue about this stuff, like, for the sake of, like, let's be on different teams, and a lot of times they don't have the most up-to-date research. There are real PhDs in all these fields that believe in a young Earth, and some of the experiments that they're doing are actually pretty compelling. Like, so one of the things as far as, like, the layers, and this is one I know, there was a guy, so I guess you'd say, like, that Cambrian explosion, when we look at those stratification of layers and we assume that that's like a timeline going down, that's very much in that gradualistic frame. But the other possible solution to that is that if you have a really, really catastrophic flood event, and this is where, like, in Genesis 6 or whatever, 7, when it talks about God opens up the windows of heaven and rains rains forth or whatever, that it's not like rain, but this is probably, that's all those meteor impacts that we have all over the globe. So you just get everything turned into a big slurry, and then when it settles, it's all going to settle according to its various densities, and that's what that huge explosion of life, well, it's, dead bodies or whatever, but that they all have that density where they float on top of some stuff and some other stuff floats on top of them. So that's one answer. And I know, like, one experiment that I did see that they tested was, it was in the Grand Canyon, and it was a geologist. You weren't doing it with any fossils specifically, but you see all the layers, and then you see where all of the layers, like, stacked on top of each other, will all bend down and then, like, up, like in, like, creases. And so the question is that if those subsequent layers were all there for a very long time, so the thing is because the bends go through all the different layers, if they were all put down slowly over long periods of time, then to get that bend, you would need, like, some powerful force to push the rocks up or down, like what do you call it, tectonic movement or something like that. And if that's the case, the force would create a massive amount of heat. It would essentially melt those stones in the junctures where they bend. But if they were all laid down in rapid succession and for a period of time are all very soft, it's essentially a mud clay, but just layers of sediment divided by density, then they could all bend and move at the same time, and you wouldn't have that same heat stress. And so they did the tests, and they took the samples from there, and they found no evidence of heat stress in those joints, which seems to fit their hypothesis that it makes more sense. They were all the different layers were laid down at one time. So, I mean, the only reason, like, it's one of these things where the only reason you don't hear about it is because there's a scientific community that has a big vested interest in the theories that have been, developing for a long period of time. So I think it's, I don't know, it's up in the air. And if any of our governments continue going the way they're going, like official science is going to, it's not so official even anymore. So who knows? But
okay, you are raising the question of who of the scientists should I believe? Who is speaking the truth, and who is tainted by commercial or interest or career interest and whatever? And this is a very relevant question in climate science. In this case, I think it's easier to find good people. But anyway, the solution to the question, who do you trust, is the TLC solution. You have to know them personally.
Yeah.
You have to let them give long form, 1 hour, 2 hour presentations personally. And you have to, on following a couple of such presentations, get to know the person as a person and get to know his wife. And after you know the person, then you can relate better to the theories that, or actually to the facts that is presented. Is he really presenting the facts, or is he how much is he filtering the facts when he's presenting them? It also amounts to the person in the end.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting thing about that story was that there was a massive amount of difficulty and really purposeful people trying to stop them from being able to do the experiments, which to me, that is just that. I mean, this is the thing to me. You say, like, okay, if most people think it's obviously the world must be very old, and you have some experiment that you think could prove otherwise or whatever, or if you think, it should be easy to discredit these things. You should want people to be able to do the experiments. It's one thing when people just come up with different frameworks of interpreting the text, and this is what they did in the Middle Ages or whatever. All the philosophers, they just made up the theory. They never tested anything. But if you have an experiment, or you think there's an experiment that's going to prove or disprove, you should encourage them to do it. Especially if you're confident that you're right, you should want your opponent to test his theory. But it was clearly much more of a bureaucratic and ideological impulse that was trying to keep them from being able to do these tests than any scientifically motivated questioning about the veracity of the hypothesis. So, yeah, I mean, but that just kind of shows you a lot of the character of a whole, even beyond the individual, just the character of the different scientific communities. Who's doing the most experiments, who's being the most transparent, who's trying to discover the truth, and who discards their hypothesis once it's been disproven, versus, because a lot of these things are very difficult to test empirically.
Yeah, history is generally hard to. History can be observed, and history cannot be tested as as a rule. Which brings me back to the history of the whales. So there were whales in the desert because at the time the desert was flooded. And then everybody will be okay with that. And the story of the whales is an interesting story because they used to be land animals. So we have a story of creatures that used to be fish in the sea, and then they climb on land, and then they live on land quite a while, and then they sort of decided they're going back to the sea. And that was not easy, because by then you cannot breathe water anymore. And by then you have legs and not flippers. And making the transition shouldn't have been shouldn't have been easy. But then if you count it on the clock, it didn't take a long time. I mean, I'm relatively speaking, I'm speaking like 5 million years.
Mm-hmm.
That's that is relatively speaking a short time. So one lesson that you learn from this is that difficult transitions are possible.
Yeah.
Climbing from the sea to the land is possible, and going back from the land to the sea is possible. Then the impossible can happen. And I see it as wisdom literature. I can read a book and learn some lessons from it. I can also read the rocks and learn lessons from that story. I treat it as a story that should be accepted as face value, because there is quite as much evidence, as much proof that you can possibly have for any story. And you just have to accept it and learn from it. And there's a lot to be learned from that story, because it's a long story involving many actors. I learned a lot from it.
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny is I think that's, if you have to say like Satan put the dinosaur bones wherever, I also think, one of those things is when you got to attribute it to Satan of like, when did everybody start lying in their stories all the time? And I don't think that people were preserving lies until very recently, with the cost of transmitting knowledge through stories and things like that. Not to say people don't make mistakes, or they present what what they present is what they think is correct and accurate. So, the idea that everybody was just writing fiction in mythology or whatever, I think is that's one of those things that ought to be questioned a little bit more closely by skeptics, I guess.
Yeah. I hold the stick both ends. I say that if I, on one hand, I take the story of the long earth and I read it as a moral story, as a moralistic story. On the other hand, when I read the Bible, I refuse to treat it only as a moral guide. I always treat it like hard historical truth. For that argument that you have raised, if it was not the hard truth, then why did people invest so much effort in telling it? And I go as back further back in time as the Garden of Eden, I mean, the story about the Garden of Eden was passed from father to son for many, many generations before it was put to writing. Why bother? Why bother telling your children something that is not true and presenting it as truth? And even if you suspect that one generation did it, why repeat it every generation if it's not true? I mean, at some point, I think people stopped believing that it is actually true, and people started treating it like a moralistic story. But I think that at the beginning, when this story was starting to spread around, I think people then believe it to be the hard truth.
Yeah, I think you could probably see this just even in the more recent, well-recorded transmission of religious knowledge and stuff like that. I don't think the problem is that people don't write lying, faulty texts. They first take true texts, and then they use them for less than truthful purposes, I guess you could say. Let's take this story and manipulate the way we share it to control people's behavior, or to get them to do what we want and not what we don't want, and then that's what they trade the credibility of the text for short-term power, and then that erodes the long-term credibility of the story.
Fine. So when I read the story about the Garden of Eden, I say that was supposed to happen 6,000 years ago. Let's say that we are counting it wrong. Maybe it was 8,000 years ago. Doesn't matter. How was the world looking at that time? What is the scientific truth about it? How did the Middle East look at that time? And then you discover, and it's not much of a surprise nowadays, that the desert was green. The Sahara Desert was a garden. The Arabian Desert was a garden. And at that time exactly, that garden dried up. So people were escaping from the drying desert, and they were telling their children stories about that garden that was lost. And they were attaching moral implication. They must have been saying, it's for our sins that we have been chased out of that garden. But it is a fact that the garden existed and people were chased out. And then you read the Bible in Hebrew, because Hebrew dates to that period. I mean, it's not exactly the same language. And as much as it is the same language, I'm finding hard to understand and I'm finding it hard to read. But some words in Hebrew date back as far as the invention of pottery. So I'm reading the story in Hebrew, and I'm trying to say, what is the story actually telling me? Not what was the implications that were put on top of it. And then I get to a phrase about what is keeping us from coming back to the garden. Because I think the most important piece of information that would have been passed from father to son is why are we not coming back? There was this garden, and it was such a pleasant place. Why are we not going back there? And the Bible is saying something strange. It's saying that in Hebrew it's Lahav HaCherev HaMitapechet. And the way it is translated nowadays, because Cherev is a sword, and Mitapechet is rotating, and love is an inferno, is fire. So you get an image of a rotating fiery sword that is somebody must be holding and preventing you from coming back there. This is not how I read the Hebrew, because the word cherev can be read as dryness, as a drought. And the word mitapechet can be understood as a change. And love, it is something very hot. And what I read in that phrase is simply climate change. I'm reading about an awful drought. The weather suddenly becoming uncomfortable, impossible. We cannot go back there because it is a desert. That's what I read there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what it says too there, where Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham and Lot stood over there and Lot looked at it and it said it looked like the Garden of Eden. And now it's, where the Dead Sea is. And that's, certainly the change that more or less underwent there.
Yeah, because that was exactly what happened. We're reading now the story about Jezebel. And Jezebel was falling from the tower in a place called Israel. It was a town. It was actually the site of the military camp of the army of Achav. And we found this tower. We know exactly where it is. And that is a relatively high point. And from there, the valley of Israel starts going east into the Dead Sea, into the Rift Valley, basically finally to the Dead Sea. Now, the river Kishon, the one that is mentioned in the story of Eliyahu, with the prophets of the Baal, is going from that vicinity, from Israel, west, and it finds the Mount Carmel, where the story with Eliyahu was, and it has to circumnavigate the mountain, and it gets and it spills into the sea, where now the city of Haifa is. Now, it's not a high slope. When you go from Israel to the sea, you don't go down by much because it's a valley. Yeah, it's the Israel Valley, and there is a river going into the sea, meaning that there is not much of a height difference. So if you raise the sea level by just a bit, or if you lower the ground by just a bit, then the Mediterranean Sea will spill through the Israel Valley into the Dead Sea. And all of that Rift Valley will be filled with water.
You know, they also found those sulfur balls down there. Have you seen that?
I know that they found, I know that they found it. Basically, they found Sodom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the climate change that comes from outer space. Yeah, that's the one you can't ever really prepare for. So I mean, that's always the element of I don't know. I guess like I don't know. I guess maybe the hard thing to deal with that is to make the connection between like human activity and something like that or whatever. But it is interesting. But that's why I think too, like I think that whole Genesis. My whole thing is Genesis 1-11. If that's before the Tower of Babel, it must have been the memory of something that words are they're just too simple. Like, so it could be explaining anything. It's cosmological things. It's not just isolated to a particular region of the globe. It could be bigger than the globe. That's kind of what I think he went to in some of this. He had all this stuff about like how, like the planets, because these are all the gods and all the other mythologies and whatever. And he basically he's trying to say like I can just read it on the back here. Velikovsky persuasively connected the sudden entrance of Venus into the solar system and its frequent collisions with the planet Mars with the widely held tradition of a great flood that consumed mankind, Plato's story of the lost continent of Atlantis, the fiery image of the feathered serpent in Aztec lore, and many other legends. So, I mean...
I call it not being careful enough. It's putting two thin lines into two small dots. It is a conspiracy theory.
Well, he did make one of the things that was interesting is that he made predictions about the planet Venus that were later verified by greater instruments, like that it spins the opposite direction and its high temperature. He made these predictions based on these mythological things, and then the science bore them out. So it's very interesting. But he actually got blacklisted out of the science community because essentially, like the guy whose books were in the schools were. It was like a publishing thing, it was money or whatever. Somebody basically got him blacklisted because they didn't want to lose money, essentially. So, the corruption of these things is always very human in origin.
I have some editorial questions. This is your channel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to have the administration privilege of kicking people out from this channel?
I don't know if you do. I mean, because I'm on Jacob's account and I just added my channel to his account. So if you have
okay, so we are on Jacob's account somehow.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm just not streaming on his channel, but
okay, fine.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I have administration privileges.
Yeah. Oh, we had somebody in the comments.
Somebody kicked out. Yes, somebody. Boris the Hammer Johnson. I don't like his name. How much time do we have still?
I don't know. However much, maybe 30 minutes or so, I'd say. Maybe more. I don't know. Yeah, probably. I think probably 30 minutes.
Okay.
You know, the thing was that I really didn't like about the old Earth, or it's just boring to me. Like, just trying to imagine like all of these like just ages and ages of like these monkeys that are just slowly like barely figuring out the next thing or whatever. Like, I just couldn't conceive of it. It's
well, of course, nobody can conceive of it really. But we make narratives. What we have in our minds are stories that we are telling ourselves, and we can grasp our own stories, which somehow are some kind of a reflection of the truth.
Well, it is funny because that's what I realized, because I taught at a science in a middle school. It was a Christian school, but they just had they didn't have specifically Christian texts. And then I look at the part on evolution and all this, and well, they have to use cartoons. They use the drawings, and it's they have this picture of these different creatures morphing from one into another, and it's like anytime you watch it, it's like you got to watch the video. It's sped up. It's just a thing that quickly changes, but there's just a timeline on the bottom that's zipping past millions and millions of years. So it's like we can only perceive of the kind of change that we can actually observe, but we've just said at the same time, this is unobservable. The thing that you're observing is unobservable the way it really happens. So we're always
but the book that you read or the animation film that you watched, that was observable.
Yes, so but it was just a narrative that somebody wrote.
Yeah. So I have a fairy tale to tell you. It's a fairy tale. It's a long Earth fairy tale. For those who are naive enough to believe in the old Earth story. You want to hear this fairy tale?
Go for it.
Go for it. So many years ago, in a land far, far away called Pakistan, there lived a clan of mythical creatures. And there were wolves with the hoofs of a sheep. So they look very much like wolves, and they would hunt prey. But on their feet, they had hooves, like the hooves of deer or of sheep. And they would run fast and catch that prey and be merry. And then climate change, and things got bad. And some of that clan said, we had enough of living here in this land many, many years ago, far, far away. We are going back to the place where we came from. And the other asked them, where is this place that we came from? And they said, well, don't you know? Our forefathers were living in the sea, and they were driven out of the sea and went to the land. We have enough of this land. We are going back. Well, this is silly, because in the sea there is the shark, and there is the barracuda, and the giant squid. You will not survive there for a minute. And anyway, how will you breathe in the water? And what use are your hoofed feet for swimming in the water? But that family did not listen to the good advice, and they went back to the sea, and they have learned to swim using their tails, and they learned to hold their breath, and they have adapted the sea as their new home, and they are hunting the shark, and they are hunting the giant squid, and they are merry. And at the time, they got a nickname. All of the friends that were making fun of them called them whales, because of the wailing and crying that will happen when they realize their big mistake. But they're still called whales, although they're living in the sea very happily. So that was the fairy tale. What is the moral of the story?
Well, you can't please everybody. That's for one thing.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just checking. Is Chezi and David still here?
I don't know.
I told them to stay.
Chezi and David.
Yeah, that was 9/7. That was
a while ago.
Almost an hour ago. Yeah. So I don't know if they're still here.
Well,
and if they're not here, that's the pity, because this is the whale story that I promised David. And the reason that I was telling this fairy tale is for the moral of the story. Let's see if they listen to me and if they get the moral of the story by themselves. As David says, it is a bit Zionistic and a bit Trinitarian.
It's making me think of sunk costs.
Yeah. I don't think that evolution believes in sunk cost. Evolution says, stick what you have. Try to improvise with what you have.
Yeah. Well, I talked to a guy a long, long time ago on my channel, but he's a doctor, and he was really suspicious about the evolutionary claims. He's an old Earth guy, so there you go. But old Earth creationist, I guess you could say. But he really became started following the increase in study of epigenetics, and so he runs like a Facebook group all about it or whatever. But it's really interesting that that it was one of the key, the key beliefs of the traditional evolutionary thing is that the genetic changes that you acquire through experience can't be passed on. But the epigenetic evidence seems to point against that. Now, right as of now, the way that things are right now, the types of changes that are passed on are pretty subtle. They can be very significant, but they are kind of subtle. Like there was the one with the women in Holland who went through the famine, and then their children, they all get diabetes because their body adjusted. While they're pregnant, their bodies are telling them, you better get ready for a life of famine, and then things bounce back. So then they didn't quite, they get the opposite problem of having to struggle with overweight and diabetes and all that. But it's interesting that the body was picking up those things, and I think that those mechanisms may have just been much stronger in the past. To me, it makes a lot of sense, because if you think about how an animal might transition from one climate to another, or something like that, in the standard kind of way of thinking about it, like you have to hope for various random mutations, some of which might be beneficial, and then those ones have to still pair up with other creatures that have the same beneficial mutation, and those ones will survive, and all these other ones will die out. But you don't really have the evidence of all those other types to the degree that you would expect them. It makes more sense, and much more elegant and efficient, that maybe the transitions happen quickly within a few generations. That your kids are going to be hairier than you when it starts to get cold or whatever.
Okay, so the names for it is the Darwinian evolution versus Lamarckian evolution.
Yes, yeah.
And the names are a bit misleading because they are presenting Darwin and Lamarck as two people that have a controversy, that disagree with each other, which is not necessarily the historical case. Now, Darwinian evolution is survival of the fittest. And this is patently true. I mean, it's just true. It's not even a scientific true, because it's a mathematical true. It's logic. What is survival of the fittest? Those that are most fit to survive, survive. So those who survived are retrospectively called the fit, and those are people who survive. Survival of the fit, it's circular. It's just saying nothing. But it happens. Yes, there is selection. So it just happens all the time. Question is whether it fits, or whether it explains the variability. Well, it explains the observation, and it doesn't. So Lamarckian evolution, it is now thought that it also takes place, and it's faster.
Mm-hmm.
And Darwin actually realized that he doesn't have, that Darwinian evolution doesn't hold the answer, or the full answer. First of all, the name of his book was The Origin of the Species. And he never attempted to explain the origin of life. And he knew that he has a deficiency in that. And second, he knew that he's not explaining all the variability. And this is why he wrote another book. And in the second book, he was talking about sexual preferences, sexual evolution. Evolution is that is caused by the female choosing the male. And that is also a bit circular, because what are they basing their decision on? They must have a telos. I mean, it seems that the female peacock have the telos of wanting to have long tails and therefore choosing males with long tails. And suddenly, the mechanical process of evolution has a purpose. So it's never simple.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, Darwinian evolution is true, does happen all the time. And things happen on top of that. And when you get to fast evolution, then those the other processes that are taking place. And the way I see it, and that's already my personal view, is that Lamarckian evolution prepares the mechanism by which Darwin evolution works. So it prepares the tools, and Darwinian evolution fine-tuned from where the Lamarckian evolution left it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that might even be that maybe so I wonder if the Lamarckian toolbox is the thing that gets depleted over time. So if you go further back, there was more ways you could adapt to a certain circumstance, but then, once you've survived and some other cousins and brothers haven't survived, you don't, the ones that took the other path, that gets more reduced, which is why we have, we see an epigenetic effect that might affect somebody's metabolism or things like that, but you don't see, there's plenty of people born in climates that are not native, and their kids don't immediately come out with a different shade of skin or a different amount of hairiness or any of that. Like I have a daughter that was born in a blizzard, but she's not, she doesn't look like an Eskimo or something. So the effects, maybe they slow down over time. I think, that's one aspect of, I guess you could say, of potentially shortening the need for so many generations, is if those changes happen faster. And the epigenetic changes can change more things at once, like the finch's beaks. It's not one little change in a gene; it's a bunch of them, and then it can go back to being the other way in a few generations if the circumstances change. That was almost that, because that was even the thing that was one of the problems with Darwin's thing, is he looked at the observable changes, but then once we learned how complex the cell was and DNA, and if you're trying to look at one little random mutation in a gene doesn't produce that big outward change, but so if you want to connect, like different species of apes or whatever, you have to lengthen the timeline, because you're saying the change has to occur in these tiny increments, but it may actually been able to change much more quickly in a Lamarckian way.
Well, since evolution is always a race, I think what evolution usually tends to do is to build a mechanism that can act faster and faster. And human culture is an example. It's a mechanism that we arrived at by evolution, which enable us to react faster than genetically possible. And Chezi, an hour ago, said something about it. He says that the count of the 6,000 years begins when we, I call it a phase transition, from a phase in which we are mainly evolving genetically to a phase when we evolving culturally. I mean that is quoting Chezi. Still, I mean, it didn't happen in one day. It was a process.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is I wonder, like, I mean, you know, this you definitely take, if you want to take seriously like the long ages of the generations in the beginning of Genesis. I think, you know, there was definitely an assumption that evolution is always going in this upward trajectory of better and better, but it can very easily go in a downward, you know, trajectory of worse and worse. And I think, I don't know if there's a video, maybe you can look it up if you want. It's like the most inbred family in America. But it's this family, and like they basically like bark at each other. They're conveying a little bit more meaning than your dog does when they speak, maybe, but they can't form words, you know, and this is, you know, from several generations of inbreeding, but like, you know, those genes can degrade pretty quickly in that direction to where you do almost get something that looks very much like a different species.
Yeah, evolution sometimes, I mean, gets to walks in a direction of lesser sophistication and lesser complexity. That's a trap that the scientists fall sometimes. When they discover a new species of something that looks very, very simple, they tend to assume that this is at the base of the evolution, that this is something that other species evolved from. But sometimes they discover that this is actually a descendant of something more complex. They just forgot the complexity and returned to a simple state. Evolution works both ways. I mean, whatever works at the moment. I have a good story about that. When we were starting to be fish, the very, very beginning of the story, we had some simple brains, like fishy brains. And we were swimming in the ocean and sort of trying to survive as much as we could. But that's difficult because swimming is hard. And to have the energy for swimming, you need to eat. And sometimes you don't get to eat. It's much simpler if you just sit at the bottom of the ocean and filter your food like a sponge. Sponge is very good at that. It just sits there, not moving, and eats whatever is coming his way. So some of our forefathers, the fish, who later some of them went on and got more complex and developed bigger brains and went up on land and became dinosaurs or whatever. But some of them took the easy path. and they just settled on a bit of rock and stopped swimming. And eventually they lost their brains because you don't need your brains anymore. Just sitting there at the bottom of the ocean and filtering. And these are the sea squirts. Have you heard of sea squirts?
Sea squid?
Squirts. As in squirting.
Oh, sea squirt. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that like a sea cucumber? Is that the
it's even simpler than that. It just swallows water and takes whatever food it may water, and then it squirts the water from the other end.
Ah, okay. Ascidaceas. Yeah, that's the scientific name, but yes,
No,
okay. Known as sea squirts.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just
So
I typed in sea squirt. That's what.
So these are very distant relatives. We all started as fish. We chose the path to become the crown of creation, and just sitting there and squirting. There's a twist. We are forming now communities. We are forming. We are becoming social. We are forming it. We are formed into tribes and into nations, and that seems to be our path forward. As you, but so do they. They now reversing direction and trying to be sophisticated again. So they are now forming communities, villages.
The sea squirts are?
Yes.
Okay.
And doing it without any brain, just sticking together and forming long chains. And they're floating now freely in the oceans like giant creatures, which looks like some long snakes, but actually a colony of those sea squirts working together. So evolution works this way and works another way and then the other way. As I said, you can either believe the story or you don't, but I found it bizarrely instructive.
Mm. I think this is one of the things I think about in my book. Obviously all of culture and technology and these things, they give us so much benefit, but we put all that complexity outside of ourselves and we put it into the things that we surround ourselves with, and then it's easier for us to grasp and access those things because we've essentially put ourselves into the environment. But then if you take the person that grows up in that environment and toss them in the desert, they're going to be in big trouble. Whereas the person who's suffered and endured more things, they have had more of the environment brought into them. That's it's a survival trade-off, But because I almost think about like that Antikythera device they found in the Mediterranean. There, you ever seen that thing? Yeah. And like that's so complex or whatever. And it's like we have things that are way more complex than that. But if somebody digs up this thing, they're just gonna be like, oh, this culture just had these shiny black mirrors. Like, what could they even what can they even tell about our level of sophistication from this at a certain point? And probably as we go to the next thing, it'll be even more incomprehensible as actually being something of discernible sophistication, like
Another editorial question. Who is Michael Louis TH1?
That is me on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the TH1?
Well, I just put in my full name. That's just what they split it out, but it's Michael Lewis Thomas. So
okay.
And then it cut off. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
They just gave me a name when I tried to type my name in. So
okay.
yeah.
So strangely enough, we have more views in X than the Sotoris.
Yeah. Well, the thing with X is that they just count it as a view whenever somebody looks at it. So it's like if somebody just scrolls by, it's a view. It doesn't mean that anybody's watching now.
Okay. Nobody's watching us.
Yeah. Well, that was a good talk on whales and various other things. You have any other thoughts you'd like to put out there?
Well, if I spill all my thoughts now, what was going to happen? I mean, your baby is still very young. You're going to be bored at your house for
that's true.
Quite a few months more. I mean, I have to keep some of my crazy stories for later.
Yeah. I got to figure out, I only got one view on the video I put out today. So I don't know if I'm being, manipulated by algorithms or whatever.
No. We have discussed it last time. If your target is the pastor and you are boring him to death with telling him things that he already knows, how many viewers do you expect?
Okay. Yeah. Well,
I'm sorry to being a bit blunt, but I'm trying to help.
Well, I guess I'll just I'm going to do it just so I said that just to finish the job. I'll put the rest of them out there, but
there is a tool, Google, called the Notebook LM.
Yes. I somebody was telling me about that. That was the one that, that put a bunch of the big documents in. So,
yeah. So you can just put all of your chapters, the YouTube chapters, put them into Notebook LM and ask him to summarize it.
I did do some summaries. I put them out there, but I don't know. I mean, some of it was more even like this was me, because I didn't finish college, so I said I'm not going to go back and finish college. I'll just put out a big book, and then if people just say, "Wow, look how big that book is! You must be smart." Good enough, But if anybody wants to check and make sure it's not nonsense, they'd have to read it. So that was the other kind of thought, but.
What this tool does, when it does a summary, it presents the summary as an animation film that is very, very low level. I mean, something that you can present to kids.
Okay.
And I took extremely serious, complicated videos. Like there is a video that explained all the different kinds of sponges there are in the sea, and gives all your Latin names and how they differ from each other. The most boring subject ever. And it turned it into a nice, enjoyable animation film for kids. And so mean 10 before 10 temples. Try to push it in the simplest term first, and then drive the wage, then slowly increase the complexity.
Okay. Yes, that was on my list. Was one of this time that I have that to figure that one out, because I have a lot of other things too that are written that are more or less the rough draft, and I don't want to be redundant as much as I'm necessary. The writing process is helpful for me, so it's not necessarily that I know not everybody's going to want to read it. But I just figured it was good to what I wrote it, so I'll put it out there. It's helpful for me to write it. That's how it gets stuck in my head in the organized way. I guess that's the thing. The way that LLMs are modeled after human brains in that kind of way, anyways. But because once you formulate something in your own words, you really understand it. But so that's what I always am just trying to do. So that's why it's rehashing too, because I want to make sure, do I really know what I'm talking about here? So yeah, it's not for everybody, I know, but the next book will be much shorter, I promise.
Mark T. Parker today came very close to your position. He wants the small church to be back in play again. Some location that will be the center of a life of community of a community. He hasn't combined it with vocational training.
Yeah, he's mad. He's mad that the young men that need jobs are joining the immigration ICE, recruits or whatever.
Well, I told you, if you really want, if your target in life is to keep the men occupied and make a good war, and if not that, you.
Well, the goal is to do the thing that's not war. That's why it's more of a complex problem.
Yeah. So start building pyramids.
Yeah.
Build the Hoover Dam. Build the stairway to Mars. But all of we cannot do the big projects because thanks to temple, we have to build small first.
Mm-hmm. Well, what time is it there? It must be getting pretty late, huh?
11 p.m. It's soon to be my bedtime.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go. Kids will be home soon, so this was a good talk. Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. See you.
See you later.